Let's dive right into the whole Benjamin Davis thing. Did you know him personally?
I sure did. Sure did, yes.
What was he like as a person?
I've never had the opportunity to work directly for General Davis, but certainly have met him and known him over the years, and have held him certainly in high esteem as the new buzzword, I guess, as a role model for so many of us. General Davis, in my mind, is a very calm but certainly an effective and profound leader. What always amazes me about General Davis, and even when I see him today, is when he stands up today, I mean, he's ramrod straight as if he just stepped into the military, even at his senior age. And so that has always been very impressive about him to me.
You said you never worked with him, but you probably have heard many stories about him, or maybe had served in a place that he had served in
Sure.
ahead of you.
Yes.
What were people saying about him, or did they have any particular stories that stand out about him as a person?
Well, there are certainly several that stand out, and I think you're exactly right on target. What kind of man was this? I remember I went to the Philippines in 1969, and General Davis had recently been the commander of 13th Air Force, as a matter of fact. And that was the buzz of the Philippines. Folks there just loved him, just loved both him and his wife. I think people really always thought of General Davis as a very kind, decent person, first of all, and then an extremely, extremely effective leader and commander. And those were the things that I remember particularly about General Davis from a personal standpoint, not so much from his military or his professional standpoint. There's a real legacy there as well. But it's always good to know that the man, so to speak, is someone that people have always respected.
He was very instrumental in desegregation of the services, of course, particularly the Air Force. What kind of legacy does he leave behind? Because before, of course, we had separate units,
Yes.
blacks and whites and other minorities. Now, all of a sudden, he was in there saying, let's put all these things together.
Yeah.
Now it's 40-some years later. I mean, what have you seen on that? Is there true equality?
Oh, yes. Let's go back and talk about those early times when General Davis really first started working on the problems that he saw both with our society and particularly with the military and the mission at which we were trying to accomplish at the time, not to mention the difficulties which he went through when he was going through West Point. Out of that experience then, General Davis saw that it was very, very difficult to try to accomplish a military mission by separating the talents of the individuals at which you were going to work with. And so he worked hard to try to correct that. Not so much, I don't think, from his work at the time wasn't specifically about racial equality, even though that's the direct result. He was really concerned about the mission, and he tried to describe that to people. And I think, as I and others look back on it, the impact that General Davis had on the military, the Air Force, and the nation at that time is as significant as the war itself, World War II itself, because that was truly a turning point in my mind for the nation, World War II. And the work that Davis done was also a turning point for the people of this great nation of ours. So it had a very significant impact. Again, we didn't truly realize that when it was happening, but now that we look back on it, we see the impact of all of that.
So then what did he specifically do to help integration?
Well, let's talk about the times when, folks claimed that blacks certainly did not have the talent to go out and be professional officers in this case, and didn't have the talent to go out and demonstrate clearly that they could engage in combat as well as anybody else. Davis, without, and I think the interesting point you have to realize, Davis didn't have someone to coach him like other officers would have had at that time and like I have today, of giving me advice on how I can approach a certain difficult problem. Davis had to come up with this all by himself, basically. And he came back and spoke to the powers, in other words, the leadership of the Department of Defense and the leadership of the Department of the Army Air Force at that time, Army Air Corps at that time, and clearly illustrated how African Americans at the time had carried on in their combat role as well, and in some cases better than others, because these individuals, all of the experience which they gained, they had to develop that themselves, their training and their experience in combat. So Davis took that on, basically because he was the commander of the unit. And not only was it an affront to his people, but it was a personal attack on him. And he took that on. Now, what I really like about this whole story and General Davis as a professional officer, obviously this is a subject that he could have gotten very, very emotional about and presented it from an emotional standpoint. Instead, he knew that that would not have been successful. So he approached it from a very professional standpoint and really contained his internal emotion. And I think that really won the day for him and for all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean all of the citizens of the United States.
You mentioned he didn't have officers or other personnel around him to coach him like you may have today. But he had such a record with the Tuskegee Airmen.
Sure.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that and how maybe that helped build up his character? Into
Well, certainly General Davis had outstanding co-workers around him. What I really meant when I said he didn't have others to coach him, others in the Air Force leadership to coach him on how you deal with difficult problems like this. So it was General Davis, who was the senior here, as well as those folks that worked for him, who had even less experience than he did. So the coaching that they could give him would only be based on their small world, so to speak, and not the Air Force and the Army Air Force Army Air Corps at large. So that made it difficult. However, again, the people that surrounded him and all of the men that was involved with him in the Tuskegee Airmen certainly were giants in their day. And many times we don't think about, for instance, those enlisted men that worked on the airplanes. You have to realize that they had hand-me-down kind of equipment. So they had second-rate equipment, very low training, professional training. But they made the aircraft work, to me, which was the sheer ingenuity that they brought with them from their earlier civilian lives. You know, it's almost like working on the farm where I grew up. You always found a way to make it work. And that's what these individuals did. They kept those airplanes flying. They got their pilots out to accomplish the mission and got them back home safely on many, many, many occasions.
They had quite a distinguished record, from what I understand. They never lost a bomber that they escorted. Are there any other distinguishing things that stand out about the Tuskegee Airmen?
Well, of course. I mean, that part of the record at which we talk about today that clearly sets them apart is the fact that they did not lose a bomber that they at any time during this very tough part of the war. Lots of combat experience that they experienced. And they never lost a bomber. Yeah, we quote that today, but there were so many other things that, in my mind, that surrounded that great legacy. Just think about, on a daily basis, the kind of things they had to be confronted with. There were other missions that they accomplished as well, whether that was combat patrol and shore patrol and just going out road recce and finding targets and destroying them, whether it was troop trains, whether it was ships or what have you. So there are a whole host of other things that they accomplished, and then the real skill of flying the airplane at which they flew during that period of time against a well-trained enemy, I would say, and then being successful at accomplishing that. Lots of gunnery fire, ground fire that they had to contend with, and to maneuver themselves through and around that, and to be able to accomplish the mission satisfactory, and many times well above that, and get back home safely is a testament to their great commitment.
Now, given the Tuskegee Airmen's success in war, do you think if they hadn't been as successful, and even if it had been right along the same successful level as the other units, that would have been a much harder sell for integration for General Mills?
Oh, I think, yes. I think you have to remember that because you're starting from not an even point with everybody else, which the Tuskegee Airmen clearly did not start from. Just the sheer fact of them thinking of themselves, well, this isn't an experiment. I mean, you know, that wouldn't be a point to brag on. You'd like to think of yourself as part of the real team, not an experiment of the team. So taking that kind of psychological impact, they did extraordinary things. This was also a time when human nature could have taken over and caused them to be much more emotional about this, and they had every right to be. But they chose not to do that. And I think this, again, speaks to Davis's leadership of saying, gentlemen, we're going to be professional airmen in this case. And they were professional airmen in every sense of the word, whether they were talking about and working with their daily jobs or just in the off-duty time. So the fact that they stayed focused of accomplishing the mission for themselves, for the unit, and for the folks back home, I think, again, speaks to the professionalism of all of these men.
You use the term experiment. I think it's a great term, actually. But you use the term experiment and how they would have rather it not been an experiment. Yeah. Excuse me. But seeing as how it was, how was General Davis and the integration issue itself treated by other officers, the white officers?
Well, clearly, I think it's like other times and other events in the nation. There would have been white individuals on both sides of the equation here. Except the unique difference is for those that were on the positive side would have been a much quieter group. In their hearts, I'm convinced, there were many, many folks who would have liked to have stepped out and supported General Davis and the Tuskegee Airmen and all of the men that were involved in that in a much more proactive, visible kind of sense. But it wasn't the mood of the day. And then there were the others, what I would say, over on the negative side of the equation, which were very, very vocal. And that's what caused Davis so much of the problems that he had to endure during that period of time. Because not only were folks giving negative criticism, they were using falsehoods when they were doing so. And so now you had to overcome not only the difficulty of combat and ensuring that you're taking care of your people and training them, but you also had to overcome the difficulty of those that were against you, so to speak, politically, socially, and every other way, so that you could be successful.
You mentioned people making up falsehoods, or he still having roadblocks, even from people who might have supported him but were afraid from the pressure from other whites not to say anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Did General Davis, by the time he retired, feel that racial discrimination had at least virtually ended, and that all the, or most of the roadblocks, the major ones in his career, had been cleared away for himself and other black officers?
I've never asked General Davis that specifically, but from things that I've read about him, including his book, I get the sense that General Davis really think that there were still significant problems that were still there, particularly when he retired. He realized there had been success, and I think he feels proud of the fact that he was involved in engineering that success, so to speak. But I think at the end of his retirement, he still saw in the country and in the armed forces that there were still significant problems with race relations and the progress that individuals should have been able to make on their own and on their sheer merit of getting the work done. And so I think he saw that still as a problem for him.
We're going back 25, maybe 30 years, but I understand that despite integration in the 70s, there were a number of racial incidences, particularly, I guess, at Travis Air Force Base. Now, did General Davis, first of all, what happened at Travis, if you know about that? And secondly, what did General Davis do to help calm that?
I don't know the specific details of Travis. I would think for sure that of all of those events that took place in the late 60s and early 70s, and now you're beginning to talk about my time frame of when I first came in the Air Force, and we can come back to that if you like. But let's talk specifically about General Davis. I think what General Davis provided for us was to help to provide advice to the leadership at the time about how you could go about resolving the issues. I mean, the fact that it was now in the 70s that we were having problems at our Air Force Base, clearly there were a number of people then in the leadership that would not admit that we had a racial problem. while there were others who were saying, and particularly those like General Davis, who were saying, this is a problem you need to come out and deal with. And it wasn't until things got to a boiling point, such as the riots at the Travis and other places around the United States Air Force, for instance, that Air Force leadership specifically came forward, and this was during the time for General James and on that were very much in the spotlight at that time, came forward and said, we do have a problem and we need to confront these and we need to find a resolution for those. And again, I think General Davis's role was much more of saying, here is an approach that you can take, similar to the ones that he dealt with early on and basically dealt with all of his career about how you resolve these issues.
Would you say, at least just this is purely opinion, would you say that the Air Force took the greatest strides in racial equality? Or, I sure when integration came along, it happened for every service.
Yeah.
But were there more problems in the Navy, from what you understand, than the Air Force? Or?
Well, let me talk specifically about the Air Force, and because that's where my experience lie, and I can say personally, and I don't want to compare it necessarily to the other services, but just let me tell you about the strides that I think we've made in the United States Air Force. I think clearly during those early 70s period of time when I talked about the Air Force leadership, recognizing and stepping out up front at that point and admitting and recognizing the fact that there was a problem here and we need to deal with this from the leadership standpoint, not from the grassroots standpoint, which made a very, very significant difference and a turning point for us as a service. The Air Force has always thought of itself, I think, as being advanced, whether we're talking about social issues or whether we're talking about technology. And that's what I love so much about the service at which I've had the opportunity to serve in. Clearly, when that happened then, a number of things began to change and a number of things began to happen. Folks began to openly discuss race relation and racial issues such that we all could become better educated about the facts, not about the emotional part of this, but about the facts of what was actually happening to our people and what steps should be taken so that we could advance to the future. And it made a significant difference.
You talk about advancing to the future, let's talk about today. Are the levels of black officers at expected levels today, and also including general officers, and if not, why?
I think the answer lies on whose numbers are you using and whose ideas are you using. I don't know that anyone can tell me, and I've been around this business for some time now, can tell me what is the right number. I mean, because all of this is, to a large degree, is personal desire on the part of the individuals, whether you want to be a part of the United States Air Force or whether you'd like to do something else in life. So that's the first part of, I think, of the issues that you need to fully understand before you start making predictions about whether the numbers are where they should be, because I don't know what that level may be. And we've selected several measures of merit, for instance, that says what the numbers should be. One way to look at that would be to look at the makeup of the population of the United States with reference to African Americans, with reference to Hispanics, and on and on and on. And should you have that same level and percentage then in the Air Force? I don't know that that's the right answer at all. Another way to look at this, and one that we've kind of zeroed on in recent times, is say, what is the population, for instance, of African Americans graduating from college and universities that have a degree? Because clearly to become a commissioned officer, you need a degree. So maybe that, and that's about 6%. That's one we focused in on recently, and we've been kind of looking at that as a measure of merit. If you take that as a measure of merit, or any of the others, we have not reached that. The number of officers in the United States Air Force has remained the same, or about the same, over a long period of time. It goes up a little bit, but then it goes back down. And various other areas as well, as whether you look at those that are involved in aviation or other areas of the Air Force that's kind of the leading career areas in the Air Force, you find that those numbers are down. So again, I think the answer would depend on who you're talking to, whose numbers are you looking for. Certainly, we are looking as an institution for the opportunities to ensure that we are a complete and diverse organization. And to me, that has been the real strong point for me, being a part of the Air Force over the years, is to see the kind of success that we've made in being very open about the fact that we want a diverse Air Force, folks from all walks of life, from every ethnicity to be in the Air Force, and to proceed through the ranks. Sometimes we are more fortunate than others to get the numbers that we're looking for, as well as the promotions that we're looking for as well. There's always room for improvement here, and I think the Air Force leadership is zeroed in on that.